see how you cook up.
Welcome to Inner City Media, where we share stories of true crimes from the past and present. These stories are not to be glorified, but to be measured as cautionary tales. We'll take a deep dive into the minds of those accused and convicted of heinous crimes, and the victims who suffered an untimely death. It was unknown to anyone in Richezza Williams' life that she would be found dead shortly after running away from her Long Island home. With the help of an adult, she changed her identity when she was only 13 years old and took on the identity of a 19-year-old woman named Buffy Smith. After leaving home, Richezza traveled to Brooklyn, New York, and hung out mostly in Crown Heights and Flatbush. Flatbush is where she would eventually meet and befriend members of a gang that established themselves on Martin Street called CMB. Crack and coke distribution was lucrative in that area, but even more profitable in other states. It wasn't long before some of the members from CMB introduced Richezza to the game of narcotics and decided to take her on a long trip to Easton, Pennsylvania. The members knew Richezza was young, desperate, and eager to do whatever it took to build a new life in Pennsylvania, and, unfortunately, they took full advantage of this. By using her fake ID, she was able to rent an apartment in Easton, PA, where she would eventually engage in a life of drugs and alcohol consumption. According to witnesses, she was dating a 20-year-old man at the time, and they had a constant stream of drug addicts and dealers entering in and out of their home. She would eventually accumulate a heavy debt to the people who moved her to Easton, PA, because it was suspected that they were the ones providing her with the drugs, and she owed them a lot. According to word on the streets, whenever she transported drugs from New York to Pennsylvania, the 13-year-old would confiscate some of it to earn even more money to support herself. As time marched on, the men began to realize what she was doing, since they would always fall short whenever they finished distributing their product, and thus ended up having to go back to New York to re-up. After adding up all the losses, the members added them to her bill. Her debt to them was $5,000, and as a result of her lack of a job and a lack of education, she was not able to repay them. Her body had been found by the police 2 weeks later, decomposing in a crypt where she had been placed. With no idea who she really was, police officers were faced with the mystery that they could not solve. In fact, it is likely that if it wasn't for a second victim who experienced the wrath of these three men, she would never have been discovered. There was a child found dead, covered in newspapers, and wearing pants that were partially pulled down. In spite of how difficult it was for the police investigators to witness, this was only the beginning of their investigation into how she reached this point and the horrific things the members did to her. A woman named Kathleen Augusti was a known prostitute who lived in a building where people used drugs in abundance, and she was able to provide the missing piece that was needed to put the whole case together. In addition to being a victim of these men, she had also been a witness to what happened to the girl that she knew as Smith. There was also an attack on Augusti and another friend of hers named Andrea Edwards by the men over an alleged drug money dispute. Augusti was burned as a result of the men heating up a coat hanger, putting salt on the tip, and burning her. As the women listened to the men discussing getting razors, Edwards attempted to escape out of a window, terrified by their words. Once hearing the shatters of broken glass, the men were scared and they ran away, leaving the two women alive and unharmed. It was then that police interviewed Sagusti, and she told them about another girl she had seen being tortured by the men and the story of how she had witnessed this abuse. Her witnessing Williams being beaten, dragged to the basement, and hearing her screams of pain was incredibly distressing to her. There were several items brought down by the men, including a heated hanger, a corkscrew, and bleach. Towards the end of the night, when the noises from the basement had subsided, she was watching them haul out a cardboard box from the basement. And it was the dead body of Williams. And the men wanted to eliminate the evidence, so they disposed of the corpse. Using an alley, they dragged the box through a creekside path until they eventually reached the vault, where the dead woman's body was left until it was discovered almost rotted by the police 5 days later. There were more than a few of these men caught in the act of assaulting Sagusti, and the first of them was Corey Mayweather, who was 19 years old at the time. A big break came in the case when a piece of gum found next to Richezza's body had Mayweather's DNA on it. With the overwhelming evidence they had on Mayweather, he confessed to the killing of Richezza Williams and also implemented the involvement of others in hopes to get lesser time. It was through him that the police were able to discover that Williams had fallen into a life of prostitution and drug use after moving and changing her name. Richezza respected these men and looked up to them like older brothers, not realizing at the time that their nice facade would fade as they turned into cold-blooded murderers. It was also revealed that 2 other men were involved in this incident: Kwame Henry, age 20, and Stanley Albers, age 18. As of that day, there were no clues as to the location of the 2 men, and the case would remain cold for the next 2 years. Moreover, it wasn't until dental records were obtained that the pathologists were able to prove that the woman found dead was in fact not a woman named Materin, but instead a 13-year-old girl who managed to escape her Long Island house. It was in 1998 that Kwame Henry was found living in Trinidad, 2 years after the murder of Richezza Williams. There had been an altercation between him and a resident who was at a party, which led to him being held by authorities after a fistfight. It was discovered during further investigation by Trinidadian authorities that Henry was wanted in the United States for murder. Henry's mind was in a state of shock when he was extradited. He believed that he had gotten away scot-free. There was just a narrow margin between the death penalty and life imprisonment for both men, and they narrowly escaped death. Even to this day, the third man who was supposed to be with them has never been found, and the mystery surrounding him will never end. There was a possibility that Albers had already been declared dead through street justice. Nevertheless, a tip came from an individual on the West Coast who suggested that a man known as Wildman may actually be Albers after all these years. Others, however, claim that he is living in Eastern PA right under their noses, hiding out in the shadows. According to the district attorney, if he were still alive, he would have fled to Haiti, his native country. In any case, if he is caught, he will still be tried for the murder and would join the other 2 men who are still behind bars for the rest of their lives. In the end, the wrong people have led Richezza Williams astray by assuring that she can trust them, but having taken the wrong path, she found herself on the road to her killers instead. The only place a negative mind goes is down. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Inner City Media. Salute.